It was supposed to be a peaceful afternoon at the park, a father playing with his little girl, just like any other day. But things took a turn no one saw coming when a stranger, a woman who couldn't mind her own business, decided to interfere. She watched from a distance, her suspicion growing. Something about this man and the child didn't sit right with her. Instead of asking questions or getting the full picture, she made a decision that would change everything. Within minutes, police were on the scene, and the situation escalated. Tensions rose as the man, calm but clearly frustrated, tried to explain himself. The woman, who had now become the center of attention, doubled down on her claims, confident she was in the right. But as the officers began to piece things together, the truth unraveled in the most unexpected way. What the woman didn't know was that her assumptions would backfire in a way she'd regret forever. And the father, he was about to show everyone the strength, grace, and love that only a parent could. What really happened in the park that day? And how did the truth completely flip the script? Stay tuned, because this story is about to take a twist you won't believe. The father, a soft-spoken man with a warm smile, had always treasured these moments with his daughter. Their trips to the park were their little escape, just the two of them, laughing, running, and sharing snacks on a sunny afternoon. His daughter, a lively 6-year-old with curly blonde hair and a love for adventure, adored her dad. To her, he was her hero. But today, their happy routine had taken a strange and uncomfortable turn. The woman, now nervously pacing as the officers asked her questions, kept pointing in their direction. She was insistent that something was wrong, but her accusations were vague. "I don't know, it just didn't seem right," she muttered, glancing back at the father and daughter with a mix of unease and defiance. The father, meanwhile, stayed calm, though it was clear he was holding back frustration. His daughter clung to his hand, confused about why strangers were talking to them instead of letting them enjoy their day. Other parkours began to notice the commotion, murmuring quietly among themselves. The officers exchanged looks as they tried to get more details from the woman, but something about her story wasn't adding up. The father, standing tall and steady, had nothing to hide. The real question was, what had made this woman so certain she needed to intervene? The tension in the park was thick as the officers tried to piece together what was happening. The father stayed composed, but there was no denying the frustration in his voice when he finally spoke. "Why didn't you just ask her?" he said, motioning to his daughter. "She'll tell you exactly who I am." The officers hesitated, looking down at the little girl, who was now clutching her dad's leg. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered softly, crouching down to meet her eye. "They just want to make sure everything's okay." The girl nodded, her big blue eyes brimming with confusion but trust in her dad. Meanwhile, the woman stood off to the side, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. She had started to fidget, her confidence seeming to waver under the weight of the father's calm demeanor. As onlookers gathered, murmurs of skepticism and judgment toward her began to ripple through the crowd. The officers turned back to the woman, pressing her for more details. "What exactly made you suspicious?" one of them asked, his tone measured but firm. She stammered, searching for an answer. I thought it was strange, you know. They don't look alike," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. That single comment hung in the air, and everyone seemed to feel the weight of it. The father's expression didn't change, but his silence spoke volumes. The officers exchanged another glance, clearly trying to tread carefully. But the truth behind her assumption was starting to become clear, and it wasn't going to hold up much longer. The woman's words echoed in the tense silence, and for a moment, it seemed like even the wind had stopped. The father stood up slowly, his calm demeanor unshaken, though his eyes held a quiet strength. "Because we don't look alike?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable weight. The officers shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with where this was headed. The little girl looked up at her dad, sensing the shift in the air. "Daddy, why are they talking about us?" she asked, her small voice cutting through the tension. He bent down again, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Don't worry, baby girl. They just don't know our story yet. Meanwhile, the crowd had grown, their whispers more audible now. Some were shaking their heads, clearly disapproving of the woman's actions. Others stood in quiet curiosity, waiting to see how this would all unfold. The woman, now visibly nervous, tried to defend herself. "I didn't mean anything by it. I just thought, it looked unusual, and I didn't want to take any chances." One of the officers finally stepped forward, his tone turning firmer. "Ma'am, making assumptions without evidence is serious. You've brought us here to intervene in a situation that doesn't appear to warrant it." The father took a deep breath and finally spoke again. "Unusual. You think a father loving his daughter is unusual." His words cut through the crowd, and the murmur quieted once more. The officers looked back at the woman, waiting for her response, but she had none. She'd avoided their gaze, her earlier confidence replaced by something much smaller. The moment felt like it was on the verge of something bigger. The officers seemed ready to wrap things up, but the father, standing tall with his daughter by his side, had one more thing to say. Whatever came next was bound to leave everyone there with something they wouldn't soon forget. As the crowd held its breath, the father's calm gaze locked onto the woman, but just as it seemed the situation was reaching its peak, a voice broke through the tension. "Wait." A young woman emerged from the crowd, her face flushed as she hurried toward the officers. Everyone turned to look, the murmurs of curiosity growing louder. The woman appeared to be in her late 20s, her expression a mix of urgency and guilt. "I know them," she said, pointing at the father and his daughter. The officers exchanged surprised glances as she stepped closer. "That's Marcus. He's my neighbor. And that little girl, that's his daughter, Lily." The woman who had called the police froze, her mouth slightly open as she processed what was happening. The father gave a slight nod toward the young woman, a quiet acknowledgement of her words. "Thank you, Jenna," he said softly. But just when it seemed the tension might finally ease, Jenna turned toward the woman who had made the call. "Why would you assume something bad about him? He's always at the park with his daughter. Everyone around here knows them." Her voice cracked, her frustration evident. The officers looked back at the woman who had made the call, who now seemed smaller than ever, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "How was I supposed to know that?" she snapped, her tone defensive. "It's not like he introduced himself to me." The father let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Introduce myself? I guess I should explain myself every time someone feels uncomfortable with how my family looks, right?" His words hung in the air, piercing through the remaining whispers in the crowd. But then came the twist no one expected. Another man, wearing a baseball cap and holding a phone in his hand, stepped forward. "This whole thing's been live-streaming," he announced. "People are already talking about it online." The woman's face drained of color as she realized her actions were now on full display for the world to see. The crowd buzzed with energy, and the stakes of the moment suddenly felt much higher. The question now wasn't just about what would happen next in the park, it was about how this story would ripple far beyond it. The woman's face was a mix of shock and panic as she realized the gravity of her actions. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, with some shaking their heads and others pulling out their phones to watch the livestream unfold in real time. The officers exchanged a glance, clearly sensing the situation had spiraled far beyond a misunderstanding at the park. The father, still holding his daughter's hand, stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You've judged me, called the police on me, and embarrassed my family in front of all these people, all because we don't look the same." He paused, letting his words sink in. "This isn't about protecting anyone. This is about your assumptions, and now the world can see it too." The woman opened her mouth as if to respond, but quickly shut it, her face flushed with embarrassment. The tension broke slightly when one of the officers, clearly fed up, stepped in. "Sir," he said, addressing the father, "it's clear this was a false report. You're free to go, and we're sorry this happened to you." The father nodded, his grip on his daughter's hand tightening protectively. But as he turned to leave, the little girl looked back at the woman and said something that silenced everyone. "We're happy just the way we are. Maybe you should learn what love looks like. The simplicity of her words hit harder than anything else that had been said. The crowd stood still, and the woman, now completely overwhelmed, sank onto a bench without a word. But just as the father and daughter began to walk away, Jenna, the young woman who had spoken up earlier, turned to the man with the live stream. "You caught all of this, right?" she asked. The man nodded, his expression serious. "Good. Maybe this will teach people to think twice before jumping to conclusions." As the father and daughter left the park, the crowd slowly began to disperse, but the weight of what had happened lingered. The woman who had started it all sat quietly, staring at the ground as her phone buzzed with notifications. She didn't need to check it to know her actions were already spreading across the internet, her judgment exposed for all to see. The father, now safely away from the scene, picked up his daughter and spun her in the air, her laughter breaking through the tension of the day. "Are we still going to get ice cream?" she asked, her eyes bright with hope. "Of course," he said, smiling. "Nothing's going to ruin our day." As they walked off, hand in hand, it was clear that their bond was unshaken, a powerful reminder that love and family are stronger than any judgment. As the father and daughter walked away, the energy in the park shifted. People who had witnessed the scene seemed reflective, some whispering to one another, while others simply stared at the woman still seated on the bench. She sat motionless, her phone buzzing non-stop with messages and notifications she wasn't ready to face. For her, the reality of what she had done was beginning to sink in. Back at the ice cream shop, Marcus watched Lily as she happily picked out her favorite flavor, the earlier chaos seeming like a distant memory to her. To him, though, it was a reminder of the world he was raising her in, a world where appearances sometimes mattered more than understanding. But he had no intention of letting that define their story. Across the park, Jenna lingered with the live streamer, sharing her relief that she had spoken up when it mattered. "Maybe this will open some eyes," she said quietly, her gaze following Marcus and Lily as they disappeared down the street. By the time the sun began to set, the park had returned to normal, but the events of the day lingered in everyone's minds. For Marcus, it was another chapter in his journey as a father, a reminder that his love and determination were more powerful than judgment. And for those who watched it all unfold, it was a lesson they wouldn't soon forget.